Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the FAA's virtual public scoping workshop on the West Virginia International Yeager Airport Airfield Safety and Terminal Improvement Project Environmental Impact Statement, or EIS. This EIS is being prepared to assess the potential impacts of the Central West Virginia Regional Airport Authority's proposed project. My name is Andrew Brooks, and I'm the Environmental Program Manager for the FAA Eastern Region Airports Division. I'm one of two FAA team leads working to inform the scope of the EIS. Susan Stafford, Environmental Protection Specialist for the FAA Beckley Airport's Field Office, is the other FAA lead. First, I want to take this opportunity to thank each of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to learn about the Airport Authority's proposed project. The purpose of the public scoping process is to receive input from the public regarding the proposed project, including concerns, issues, potential impacts, and alternatives the public believes should be addressed in the EIS. We hope that this virtual format will allow us to reach as many interested members of the public as possible. Additionally, in order to ensure an accurate record of this meeting, please note that this meeting is being recorded for note-taking purposes only. The West Virginia International Yeager Airport Airfield Safety and Terminal Improvement Project is being proposed by the Airport Authority to address various safety and operational deficiencies at the airport. The project is proposed in two phases to separately address the airport's immediate safety and long-term capacity needs. The project includes federal actions by the FAA, which means the FAA must follow the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, and the Council on Environmental Quality Regulations implementing NEPA. The FAA has invited cooperating agencies to provide input throughout scoping and the preparation of the draft EIS. Cooperating agencies for the proposed project include the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection, West Virginia Development Office, and Kanawha County Parks and Recreation Commission. The Notice of Intent to prepare an EIS and request for scoping comments was published in the Federal Register effective on September 30th, 2022 for a 48-day public comment period. The FAA held two in-person public scoping meetings and is holding this virtual public scoping workshop to encourage the public to submit formal scoping comments. You can get more information on the proposed project or submit a formal comment on the project website at www.yeagerairporteis.com. The formal scoping comment period was originally scheduled to end on November 17th, 2022. However, based on comments and inquiries received at the scoping meetings last week, the comment period has been extended to November 29th, 2022 at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. The FAA will review public and agency comments to help inform the project's scope of impact analysis and the range of alternatives to be considered in the EIS. We will start this session with a brief project overview, which will be followed by a Q&A session. During the Q&A session, questions can be submitted by clicking on the Questions and Answers tab on Zoom. Thank you for participating in the public scoping phase of the EIS. Before we transition into the public workshop overview, I just want to take a minute to introduce the panel that I have with me. Again, my name is Andrew Brooks. I'm the Regional Environmental Program Manager for FAA Airports Division, and I'm one of the two leads for the EIS. With me, I also have Susan Stafford, the Environmental Protection Specialist from Beckley Field Office and the other lead for the EIS. Also from the FAA team, we have Aaron Braswell, who's an Environmental Protection Specialist in the Regional Office alongside me. We have Michael Adkins, who's an Engineer and Planner in the Beckley Airport's Field Office. Alan Strasser, who's an Environmental Protection Specialist with our headquarters office in DC. And Andrew Teodorescu and Laura Price, both from our FAA Legal Counsel's office. We also have with us tonight Dominique Ranieri, who's the Director of the airport for the Central West Virginia Regional Airport Authority. Allison Dukar from Ricondo and Associates, who is the Program Manager for the preparation of the Environmental Impact Statement. Dave Full with RS&H, who's the lead for the alternatives analysis on the Ricondo team. And Marie Keister, who will be moderating the Q&A session later today. I will now go into the overview. As previously noted, you can find more in-depth information on the proposed project on the website. Again, that's www.yeagerairporteis.com. That's all one word. To achieve the immediate and long-term needs of the airport, the proposed project would be developed in 2 phases. Phase 1 of the Airport Authority's proposed project is intended to address the immediate need at the airport to improve the runway safety areas, meet existing runway length requirements for aircraft operating at the airport, and replace aging and inefficient infrastructure in the terminal area. The long-term need is dependent on and in support of a potential change in the aircraft serving the airport and/or forecast destinations that are anticipated to occur further in the future. Phase 2 of the Airport Authority's proposed project is intended to address these long-term needs. As part of the scoping process, and as required by NEPA, a reasonable range of alternatives that would reasonably satisfy the stated purpose and need will be identified and evaluated as part of the EIS process. I'm now going to hand it over to Susan to give some additional specifics on the phases associated with the EIS.
All right. The proposed project would include a shift and extension of runway 523 to the northeast on the runway 23 approach in, construction of a new terminal complex, relocation of taxiway A and portions of taxiway B, and connected actions and enabling projects to support the proposed action. Phase 1, let's see. All right. Phase 1 of the proposed action would include a runway shift of 1,125 feet and extension of 285 feet to provide a 7,000-foot runway, construction of standard runway safety areas on both runway ends, relocation of portions of taxiway A and B, extension of taxiway E and construction of new entrance, exit, and connector taxiways, construction of a 166,000 square foot replacement terminal complex with 6 aircraft gates and associated components, including construction of new apron, pavement, and terminal roadway improvements, property acquisition of portions of and identification of replacement properties for Coonskin Park, use of up to 25.6 million cubic yards of fill potentially utilized from borrow areas located in the adjacent Coonskin Park, and construction of retaining walls and a culvert for Coonskin Branch to support airfield improvements in the proposed terminal facility, as well as associated other airfield work in support of the proposed development items. Phase 2 of the proposed action would include a further shift of 280 feet and extension of 1,000 feet for a total runway length of 8,000 feet, construction of standard runway safety areas on both runway ends, extension of taxiway E and construction of new entrance, exit, and connector taxiways, relocation of the remaining portions of taxiway A, addition of a 7th gate at the terminal complex, which may require relocation of the airport traffic control tower, use of up to approximately 4 million cubic yards of fill potentially utilized from borrow areas located in the adjacent Coonskin Park, and construction of retaining walls to support relocation of taxiway A, as well as associated other airfield work in support of the proposed development actions. Supporting documentation can be found at www.yeagerairporteis.com. The FAA encourages all interested parties to provide formal comments before 5 p.m. on November 29th, 2022. Comments should be as specific and substantive as possible so that the FAA can consider and address them in the EIS. There's 3 ways to submit formal comments: by email at comments@yeagerairporteis.com, on the project website at www.yeagerairporteis.com, or by mail to Mr. Andrew Brooks at the FAA Eastern Regional Office, 1 Aviation Plaza, Jamaica, New York, 11434. Thank you for participating in our public scoping workshop.
Thank you, Ms. Stafford. Thank you, Mr. Brooks. I'm Marie Keister, and I will be your moderator this evening. And the purpose of this workshop is both to inform you, but also to provide an opportunity for you to ask your questions and for the panel to respond to your answers. We do encourage you, though, that our conversation tonight, while it will be documented, our discussion is not considered a formal comment. Instead, you'll need to send that to the 3 areas that Ms. Stafford just outlined, and I will repeat those again before we go tonight. The other thing that I want to make note of is if you are on the Zoom call, what we're asking you to do is to submit your questions in the Q&A box. If you are watching on a live stream, we will still need you to tune into the Zoom link, which is available on the website, which I will repeat in a minute, so that you can enter your questions and we can respond to them. So the Zoom instructions are on the project website at www.yeagerairporteis.com. So what we will be looking for are your questions, and we are monitoring the chat, or I have a way to monitor the chat to see as your questions come in. And I am seeing that the first question is, can you share the current potential alternative locations for a new airport? I'm going to address that to Andrew.
Okay, thank you, Marie. So right now, we have not identified specific locations. What we're doing is we're reviewing past studies that were done throughout the late 90s and early 2000s and examining the alternatives that were considered, which for at the time was the regional airport that would be located somewhere between Huntington and Charleston. We've started a re-examination of those documents, and then we're also developing a rough framework for what would be contemplated for a potential new site. Dave, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that response.
Yeah, Andrew, the only thing I would add is during our scoping meetings, or in our live scoping meetings last week, folks did identify some locations they'd like for us to take a look at as potential alternatives. And we are starting that process of delving deeper into that to understand where these locations are and identifying whether they could truly be a potential alternative location for a new airport.
So another question for you, Andrew. What are some of the specific reasons for the replacement of the terminal?
Sure, thank you, Marie. So one of the goals of the project that the Airport Authority is hoping to achieve is to establish fully graded runway safety areas associated with the runway. Part of that means relocation of the taxiway within the terminal environment. And the taxiway itself has its own safety surfaces that need to be protected. The way that that could potentially be accomplished in the airport sponsor's proposal is by relocation of the current taxiway further to the south. And when you relocate that taxiway further to the south, part of the Concourse A gates then start to penetrate those surfaces associated with the relocated taxiway, especially some of the parking positions further to the southwest side of the terminal environment. In order to replace those, really the alternative is to redevelop the terminal at that point. A redevelopment of the terminal from the Airport Authority's perspective would also improve upon many of the access issues that they currently have with regard to either screening or waiting areas for terminal gate space at busier times, and then generally ADA access throughout the entire terminal environment. Dominique, I didn't know if you had anything else that you wanted to offer in terms of the terminal replacement from the airport's perspective.
Thanks, Andrew. The other concern of our current facility is that it is 75 plus years old. Cost of operation of a building of that age is getting a little bit exorbitant. So we are analyzing the replacement of the terminal with that in mind, as well as meeting safety standards dictated by the FAA.
Thank you. I will move on now to Allison. Could you speak to what finding a replacement property for Coonskin Park means?
Sure. Thank you, Marie. So as part of the evaluation of the proposed project and the EIS, we will be determining what the extent of the conversion of property within Coonskin Park for the proposed project. So the extent, so the acreage, as well as the features of the park in those areas. And then we would conduct an appraisal of the existing park, and then to look for additional locations around the county that would be viable to provide both the same acreage and the types of amenities at the park. So that will all be conducted through the EIS process. And then any replacement property that's identified, we would also study if there were environmental impacts to developing that site for park purposes as well. Andrew, did you have?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on that the replacement property itself is not property that can be currently used or slated for recreational development. So it would be wholly new property dedicated to recreation should the project be approved and a replacement plan for Coonskin be required.
And Andrew and Allison, you just touched on this. You said should property be required, but one question is, how will the expansion affect the layout of Coonskin Park? And I think what's not spoken there is if you're able to keep part of that property.
Right. So right now, the cut and fill requirements that would be necessary to develop the runway extension, as well as the safety area, would require that 25.6 million cubic yards of fill, essentially to fill the valley that's currently off of the runway 2-3. And so by grading within the park, you would be removing the taller areas on the north and east areas of the park, and essentially filling in the valley with those areas. I believe the current proposal is approximately 400 acres of disturbance within the park. We will be looking at different construction methods and further analyzing what the actual extent would be. That is kind of the proposal that the airport authority has brought forward, and we'll be reviewing that as well.
And, additionally, we don't have a full answer just yet because there are still some additional refinements as we go into consideration of initial design. Furthermore, that's an initial estimate based on the airport authority's proposal. Once we go through the alternatives analysis, there may be other alternatives that carry forward. They may have similar, more or less impact to the park, but each one of those alternatives that are carried forward through to the full analysis will disclose the full extent of those various impacts associated with each alternative. Thank you, Marie.
Thank you both. Dave Foll, please explain the process for removal of vegetation and terrain on the 400 acres. And Dave, if you could come on screen, there you are.
Yeah, no, there was just a fire truck going past me and I didn't want anybody to hear that. So sorry about that. So I think the question, Marie, if I'm reading that question correctly, is about the removal of vegetation terrain within Coonskin Park to enable to be able to get the amount of fill that's necessary for the project itself. So the removal of the vegetation, first of all, you have to remove all the trees and other vegetation because you can't use those organic materials in any fill because of the differential in settlement associated with those organic materials. So those basically you'd be kind of logging, if you will, that the park in order to get rid of that vegetation. And so then once that's occurred, then you can use the actual materials within the park, be it soils and rock and whatever, to use that for the fill. So it is definitely a several step process that goes through to be able to get the materials and to move the materials into those locations.
Thank you.
You bet.
Moving on to our next question, and I think Allison, it's going to go to you. How will noise pollution for residents along the Elk River be addressed as a result of what our questioner would assume would be an increase in air traffic?
Right. So the noise will be analyzed in the EIS, both from construction. So any construction activities within the park or on the airfield. We'll develop a project-specific schedule and equipment list. So for any alternative carried forward through the analysis, we would determine construction noise impacts from each of those alternatives. In terms of operational noise from aircraft, based on the shifting of the runway thresholds and endpoints would be shifted based on the existing noise contours at the airport. They're pretty limited in traveling off-site, but we will look at that as part of the EIS. For the second part of the question about an increase in air traffic, we did develop a forecast for the project that will be made available to the public, which identifies changes to operations and enplanements up through 2040. So that will be carried through the EIS as well.
And if I could just clarify that, you know, the forecast demonstrates based on national trends, local trends, an approved change in growth modification to the fleet mix that's expected to operate at Yeager in the coming years, regardless of the project. So the project in and of itself is not anticipated to induce additional operational growth. The airport is not currently capacity constrained. That wherein this project would kind of open up new additional capacity. The second phase is really more capacity in terms of the type of operation that is expected to come in future years. That type of fleet, where the critical aircraft, which is the most demanding operational aircraft that would operate at a given time, with over 500 annual operations, is expected to be the Airbus 320, which currently operates there from time to time, but does not meet that threshold level for critical aircraft consideration. But once it does, that is what would ultimately provide the need to extend to 8,000 feet. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Atkins, I'm going to pull you into the discussion. What is the impact of the runway changes on the recently re-engineered aircraft overrun structure at the end of the current runway?
I think the short answer to that is we don't know yet. I think we're in the process now of developing the alternatives and the screening criteria for those alternatives. So we really don't know that yet. Allison, would you have anything to add there?
I would just add, and I believe this question is in regard to the EMAS system on the runway 5 end, which the airport authority installed in 2019 as a result of the slope failure that occurred to reestablish that runway end and the safety area there. Under the proposed project, that essentially would be removed. At that time, I believe, Dominique, that it's nearing its end of useful life. So it would coincide with construction that end of the runway, the pavement would be removed to allow for that 1,000-foot safety area beyond the runway 5 end.
That's exactly what I was going to add, Allison. That EMAS system only has a useful life of 10 years. And like Allison mentioned, we installed that in 2019. So the proposed project shifts the runway down and turns that into standard safety area, which is grass. But yes, installed in 2019, useful life of 10 years, very expensive system to maintain.
Thank you. So Andrew, this is going to come to you. Will your new airport project include starting and landing platforms for UAVs, which are basically drones, for passenger or delivery, unmanned aircraft vehicles?
Yes. So currently there's no plan or the UAVs or unmanned aerial vehicles are not incorporated into the forecast in any substantial capacity at this point. I am uncertain with regard to Dominique's and the airport authorities anticipated plans for future UAV operation. However, this is not relevant to inclusion of UAV operation. There, I suppose, could be potential in the future should the need materialize, regardless of the project, for the airport to consider applications of that measure. That I'll hand it over to Dominique.
So the airport is very excited to be on the forefront of aviation technology and the future of aviation. So luckily we have our general aviation area of the airport, which is very flexible for alternative forms of aviation vehicles. And we are actually exploring installation of eVTOL chargers at this very time.
And Dominique, if you could explain what that acronym means, electric.
I'm sorry, electric vehicle takeoff and landing aircraft. So electric aircraft, what they claim will be the future of aviation. So we're very excited to be on the forefront of that here in West Virginia, working with some of those companies developing that technology as well.
And I just want to clarify that the general aviation section of the airport is further to the southeast, away from the runway and the terminal area itself. So developments in that area would not be considered within the realm or scope of this environmental impact statement. But again, as Dominic indicated, certainly could be considered for future developments at the airport.
For the panel, I'm going to share a comment that reads, do you realize Coonskin is the only major park, I apologize there, it just jumped a little bit, that Charleston has, that much of it will be destroyed, especially the parts where hundreds of people and their dogs walk every day, and especially the beautiful Elk River Trail. I began walking the trail in 1997. It is a gem, and it would be a disaster to lose it. And I think we appreciate your comment, and we encourage you to fill out a form and send it. Andrew, did you have another comment?
No, Maria, I was just going to say just that. I mean, that's the exact reason that we're here tonight speaking with you all, and we're there in your community last week to hear these types of concerns directly from all of you. Please, I want to echo what Marie said. If you have formal comments, please submit them in writing via the avenues that Susan discussed earlier. I know so far we have seen comments similar to this in terms of the scoping comments received. But, again, as I mentioned to several folks, I personally, I'm from New York. I'm not from Charleston. So when I look at the project, I kind of get a sense from a technical resource perspective, but it's this, local personal type perspective that's really absent for me and helpful for myself and my agency counterparts in terms of how we approach this analysis. So thank you again for your comment.
Thank you. And, I would just encourage you, the focus tonight is really on questions and answers to the extent that we can provide them. We appreciate your comments, but really the best forum for that is to submit those in writing at these various points that we'll review again on the website. And there is an email address and a mailing address we can provide again. So let's see, I believe we have access to an exhibit, board 26, which may help us answer this question. What percentage of Coonskin Park approximately would be required acquired, pardon me, if the project were to move forward as is?
So I can answer this one. As I said a little bit earlier, the extent you'll see here, so the kind of pink color is where the fill is proposed to be taken from. So essentially those would become the cut areas to fill in the light blue areas where the valley is off the runway 2-3 end. As we note here, that limit is approximately 400 acres. As we said earlier, we're still in the process of analyzing the slope requirements and the extent of the fill, but that is what has been proposed. It should be noted, if you see kind of the pink dashed line, rectangular line that goes into the park, that would be the future air operations area fence. So that would be kind of the limits of where the airport would operate aircraft. You'll see it is substantially smaller than the amount of cut and fill or the area of cut and fill. So that acreage within that rectangle that is not currently airport property is approximately 77 acres.
And Allison, if the airport might add, as Allison just explained, while we may affect some of that pink shaded area while construction is ongoing for Barrow, the intent of the proposed project is to provide additional usable land to the park for recreational activities. So much of that graded area would hopefully return to the park for development that they are currently planning for the future.
So this is a related question, and maybe Allison and Andrew can weigh in. Has the value of the recreational use of the current project that will be destroyed been calculated? And if so, how much is it?
So I'll take this, Marie. We haven't initiated the calculation yet. As Allison indicated, we still are determining the limits of the potential impact area. We have started working with the National Park Service and the local and state parks offices that are responsible for the park administration, and coordinate with them for their engagement under both DOT Section 4F analysis, which requires us to consider the impacts to the local recreational and park resources, as well as an impact under for lands that have received Land and Water Conservation Fund grants, which establishes the requirements that we've discussed previously about restoring the park or replacing the park. Right now, we're still just finishing up scoping within the next couple of weeks here, and then that'll inform the alternatives analysis. And once we have a set of alternatives that are carried forward for full analysis, this will be one of the initial analyses that are done in the impact analysis phase of the project. We hope to be coming back into the community at some point next year to give updates on things like the alternatives selected and where we stand with the initial impact assessment before we start developing the draft EIS. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think this is a good time to remind everyone, the exhibits that you have seen come and go during this discussion tonight are all available at YeagerAirportsEIS.com. There are also places on the website where you can contribute your comments, your official comments, including at comments@YeagerAirportEIS.com. And there is also a mailing option. So the next question, possibly for Andrew or Allison, what is the justification for expanding a runway and an airport in a state whose population has been declining since the 1950s?
Well, that's encapsulated in the purpose and need statement that we discussed earlier. Really, it's to restore the airport to the operational capabilities that it had prior to the slope failure in 2015. When the slope failure occurred, the airport had to do what's called a displaced threshold The threshold is the point at which the aircraft can safely land. At Yeager, it was co-located with the physical end of pavement. However, when the slope failure occurred and they lost the initial EMAS bed, they had to shift the threshold further up the runway to kind of recover some of the safety area and provide an equivalent level of safety. So in order to recapture that operational capacity that existed previous is what part of phase one is seeking to accomplish. It's a secondary goal to the restoration of the full safety area and improving the safety in and around the airport. But one of the reasons that the phase one includes a runway extension is actually because of the slope of the runway currently. In the airport's proposal, a shift to the northeast goes further down the slope. And as you have more of your runway on a slope, you actually need more runway in order to restore the same operational capability. Imagine, if you will, the aircraft are just going uphill. They need more distance and more speed to kind of accomplish the takeoff speed going up that slope. That's how you get the additional 285 feet of pavement that's contained in phase one. As for phase two is much further in the future. It's dependent on the emergence of the Airbus 320 aircraft becoming the critical aircraft that I discussed earlier. And as that trend materializes, it actually requires longer operational length in order to operate safely and efficiently at the airport. So the phase one is what we're looking at for immediate decision in this EIS. The phase two, because of the similar nature of the development, is contained for analysis, but is not really ripe for decision at this point. Should that aircraft materialize in the future, additional analysis would be done and a decision would be made at that future time. Thank you, Marie.
Thank you, David. I think this is for you, Allison. Are the widening of the taxiway footprints due to the expectation of larger planes, or is it due to new expanded FAA regulations?
So I don't believe under the project that any of the taxiways are going to be widened. They will be, some of the taxiways will be shifted. That is to accommodate FAA regulations based on the aircraft operating at the airport. They require a 400-foot separation distance between the runway and the parallel taxiway. So the taxiway directly adjacent to the runway. That includes taxiway Alpha, and then also taxiway Bravo would be shifted to allow for the appropriate amount of apron pavement at the new terminal location. The project would also include new connector taxiways, so to provide access to the runway from taxiway Alpha. Andrew, did you have any other notes there about these standards?
I just want to clarify that it's based on wingtip to wingtip. So it assumes that an aircraft at one physical end of the pavement and another closer in. So if they've deviated from the center lines, if they were to pass each other, that their wingtips would not clip. And it's based again on the critical aircraft. The current critical aircraft has a smaller wingtip than the future critical aircraft. The critical aircraft for phase one is the Embraer 175 regional jet. So that's why for much of the runway length, the current 325 foot separation distance could stay. In the terminal environment, we want to move it to the 400 foot separation because that does provide a more safe operation, especially in and around the gate environment. And then for any new construction associated with a shift and extension, we would look to build that to the current standard, which is 400 foot. It's when the A320 comes into the fleet in the future years, an additional the additional requirement to shift 325, what would remain as a 325 runway to taxiway centerline standard would need to shift to 400 to achieve a full level of safety at that point. There's a lot of technical stuff, so if you have some follow-up questions on the details there, please feel free to submit those, and we'll try to get to your follow-ups as we go through the questions here. Thank you.
So we're going to pull up Exhibit 26 again. And Dave, I'm going to start with you, Dave Full. As for the alternative access to the Air National Guard Armory, originally accessible from Route 114 Greenbrier Street or the Campbell's Creek intersection, will the route from the Armory to US Route 119 via the relatively new Hoppy Shores Bridge need to be altered due to this valley fill project?
Maria, if I'm understanding the question correctly, the Coonskin Drive, which is the road that goes out the new Hoppy Bridge over to 119, that roadway would, as you can see, would be buried under all this fill. We don't know exactly if that roadway can remain open or in a different alignment to continue to provide access to the other side of the park. It's something we do have to consider and study. I don't have a final answer on that because we haven't finished with the alternatives yet, but it is something that we are considering.
And Dave, are there other exhibits that would help respond to that question that we could direct people to on the website?
I'm gonna ask Allison. I don't think so. I don't think we have a particular board that is specific to these transportation alternatives. I don't think we
Not
have
yet.
Yeah.
No.
All right, so there might be a crew that wants to answer to this. Maybe Dave, Dominique, Allison. How will the fill process differ from the process that was used to previously extend the runway, which resulted in a slip onto Keystone Drive? And could this potentially affect the remaining part of Coonskin Park if it isn't relocated? Dominique looks like she's ready while Dave ponders that question.
Yeah, go Dominique, go.
I can speak to the construction and how the original slope that failed was constructed previously. That was with a material called geofencing. We have no intention of using geofencing in this project.
Yeah, and from my perspective, Marie, it's almost like comparing apples and oranges because of the conditions on the runway 5 end versus the conditions on the runway 2-3 end. They're two very different things, and so the engineering that was done for the runway 5 end is very different than what would need to be done for the runway 2-3 end. So in a lot of respects, there really is no comparison between the two.
I will also say that we, as part of the project, we're out over the summer conducting geotechnical borings within the park to determine the soil types, depth to bedrock. And I think it was 19 borings were conducted within the park and on the airport itself. That report will be made available once it's finalized. And as part of that report, the geotech engineer does have recommendations based on the soil types, especially in consideration of the previous slope failure on the other runway end.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Susan, let's start with you, and then Dominique, maybe you want to chime in. Does any part of this project include the expanding areas for the National Guard base? I'm sorry, include expanding areas for the National Guard base?
No, nothing associated with our project involves any expansion of the National Guard base.
I would second that, Susan. Depending on how the borrow areas and what flat land is created at airfield level, there may be opportunity for expansion of aprons in the future, but not proposed with this project.
Thank you. Andrew, if a feasible alternative airport site is identified, what adaptive reuses for Yeager Airport might be considered?
Honestly, it's very premature at this point to contemplate that. I don't really have a good answer for that question. It's certainly something that, should an alternate site pass through screening, would need to be contemplated in the EIS. But at this point, it's very early on So unfortunately, Maria, I don't have a good answer for the person that's asking that question at this time.
Thank you. Okay, so Allison, what is the market footprint for Yeager Airport? Does it include the Charleston-Huntington corridor?
I am not quite sure on that one. I believe it does. We can look further. I believe all that information is in our forecast. Dominique, you probably have a better answer for that than I do.
So with air service development conversations with airlines, we consider our catchment area everything within a 60 to 80-minute drive time from Charleston. So that would include some of the Huntington-Charleston corridor.
Andrew, did you want to add something?
Just one other thing is that sometimes it's a little difficult to define the outer perimeters of a given catchment area, because it really comes down in terms of passenger choice and the options available to them at a given airport. So, again, not to speak for Dominique, but certainly from Dominique's perspective as the airport operator, that's one of the goals in terms of attracting additional services, to provide that more variety of choice to the customer and, slightly increase that catchment area.
A related question about some of these marketing issues. Dominique, you've mentioned studying future impact to Yeager, and Allison has as well. Can you share what the current use figures are? How many people fly in and out? How many flights per day, month, per year? How many airlines currently provide service? That's a whole long list, but I'll bet you know a lot of those off the top of your head.
I can answer those questions for you. So currently we have service on American, United, Delta, and Spirit Airlines, and we're always having conversations with additional airlines interested in starting service here at CRW. Our passenger enplanement numbers, or how many passengers are boarding aircraft at the airport each year, are currently still down due to COVID. At our height, pre-COVID, we were seeing almost 250,000 passengers a year getting on planes here at CRW. Of course, we're still about 30% down from that figure. We also have fewer flights than we did pre-COVID, but we're working on bringing and restoring that frequency. Today, I would say we have about 8 to 10 flights a day, commercial service. That does not contemplate GA traffic and private air travel.
Thank you. Here's one maybe any of you may want to take, our panelists. Are there any county regional transportation master plans that tie in air and rail travel that you could direct us to? So I'm thinking maybe more along the lines of somewhere around DC, where I know rail lines come in.
So I'm not aware of any regional studies that have been conducted. I know that there has been conversations at the state level, but I don't know that those studies have been conducted and published yet.
And coming from the FAA perspective, we're a unit of the Department of Transportation, but we're very much focused on aviation. So we do have national planning documentations like the National Plan of Integrated Airport Systems, that has a very heavy aviation focus, but what we do not have is anything currently that has kind of a multimodal approach, or it considers aviation alongside rail or highway. Really, the structure of the agency itself kind of focuses a lot of those into the independent modal administrations, Federal Rail Administration, Federal Highway Administration, Federal Aviation Administration. So we do talk to each other as sister DOT agencies, but I'm not personally aware of any kind of cross-modal national planning or even regional planning type documentation like that.
Thank you. All right, let's see, Allison or Andrew, can you clarify what construction from that 2019 project that only has a 10-year life, is this in the same area or the direction of the proposed expansion?
Sure, that's the existing engineered materials arresting system bed, the frangible concrete blocks that were installed at the end of pavement underneath the 5 approach. If you can see in the graphic that's shown, kind of all the way to the left-hand side of the paved area, there's a box that says runway 5 engineered materials arresting system. It's that frangible concrete there that was installed in 2019 that has a 10-year lifespan.
Thank you. Next up is, and maybe Andrew or Dominique, how will this project be funded? Will the project be funded in part by state local tax dollars?
Andrew, did you want to go first?
Well, I know the airport is working with the FAA to pursue funding both under the Airport Improvement Program grants and the bipartisan infrastructure law that was recently passed for the next couple of years. There's about 4 years worth of eligibility left that the airport would be looking to pursue, competing for funding in those pots. Airport Improvement Program is our annual grant funding process. Because they would be pursuing federal funding, it's one of the federal actions that require NEPA review. That's all I can speak to from the federal perspective. Dominique, I don't know, above and beyond federal funding, what other funding you guys would be pursuing.
Thanks, Andrew. I just wanted you to handle that complicated AIP explanation first, and you make it sound so easy. The airport is currently working with state and local officials to complete the rest of the financial plan for funding this project, but the goal would be to bring in as much federal dollars into the state as possible.
Great. Before I get to the next question, I want to point out our process tonight is that you need to write your question in the Q&A box. We're not going to be calling on anyone live. So I encourage you to put your questions there and we will get to you. So why isn't Yeager fixing the destruction created by the airport, such as the current landslide on Keystone? Shouldn't this be a priority? And this might be a question for Andrew or Dominique. Dominique, looks ready to go.
I can address that. Thank you. It is absolutely a priority for the airport. Unfortunately, this issue is currently on the state's docket as it is a state road issue. So we are actually working in conjunction with the state road to help them find the funding to fix the issue. We hope to have a solution in near term.
Thank you. Dave, this is for you. We have someone who's commenting that they propose to extend the runway by valley filling Keystone Drive direction and leaving Coonskin alone. Kind of stumbled on that a little bit.
That's okay. I
it?
definitely understand it, Marie. So the real question there is, the airport authority proposal is to extend it on the runway 2-3 end. This is basically saying, can you look at extending it on the runway 5 end, which is the opposite end and we have actually included that already as alternatives, shifting the runway to the southwest. And extending the runway 5 end. So that is going to be an alternative that is included in our analysis.
Thank you. And just a reminder too, when you have a comment like that, that's exactly the type of thing we want you to submit officially in writing. So remember to do that online as well or by mail, and we'll review all of those options again. So Dave and Allison, in reference to the necessary blasting of the bedrock, what is the potential for damage to neighboring homes and other buildings?
Allison, you want to take that first, or you want me to start? Okay. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so I think, the construction methods are still to be determined. We will analyze or we'll look at various construction methods as part of the EIS. I'm not sure, based on the location of the cut and fill and the homes across from the Elk River, how, those might be impacted, but that would definitely be something that we would look at through the course of the EIS. Dave, did you have a?
No, Allison, that was perfect. That was exactly what I was going to say as well.
All right, we're standing by for additional questions. While we're doing that, maybe we could bring up that last slide that showed where you provide your comments so that you're reminded how to do that. So we'll continue to ask for questions. So as you can see, there is the web address, which is www.yeagerairporteis.com, comments at yeagerairporteis.com, or you can mail to Mr. Andrew Brooks, who you are hearing from this evening, the Environmental Program Manager, and that address is right in front of you. It's Eastern Regional Office, AEA-610, Federal Aviation Administration, 1 Aviation Plaza, Jamaica, New York, 11434.
Marie, I would also note on this slide that people might notice a change in the date for comments received. We did extend the formal comment period by 12 days. So instead of comments needing to be received on November 17th, the new date is now November 29th.
Yes, we'll be posting updated information on the website in that regard. We'll be finalizing and publishing a new notice in the Federal Register that should be coming, if not the end of this week, then early next week. And we'll be doing additional publication of that in the newspapers as well to get the word out. One thing I do want to mention is that, we do appreciate all the folks that turned out last week in person, and those of you that are joining us today. We understand that there was some confusion about the postcards that were transmitted, and I'd just like to take a minute to clarify. The intent of that distribution was that we did a kind of a high-level analysis of what could be a potential view shed for the project as proposed. We identified over 3,000 residences that could potentially see the construction at various stages or the post-construction operation of the airport. And with that in mind, we selected the residences in those areas for distribution of the postcards. If you've received a postcard, it by no means infers a potential taking of any personal property by the airport. It was merely an informational distribution to make folks aware of the project, and particularly this scoping process, to inform you of your opportunity to comment. So often we, from the federal agency perspective, go through this entire process and somebody comes through at the end and says, oh, I didn't know, I wish I had heard earlier. And that merely was our intent. So I just wanted to, on behalf of the FAA, apologize if there was any confusion in that regard, and just set the record straight. So thank you, Marie, for allowing me the opportunity to clarify that.
Thank you. And I have some more questions for you. Is there a much smaller borrow fill footprint for the phase 1 expansion versus phase 2? Was there a picture of the borrow fill for just phase 1? I've got a lot of questions here in one. Is it an oversimplification to say that phase 2 is to accommodate the A320 as the new critical aircraft? If so, is it possible that Yeager could decline to use this as the critical airplane and limit the scope of the expansion? And what are the considerations for not moving to that airplane, the A320, if it does become the critical airplane? A lot to unpack there.
So Allison, if you don't mind starting with the phase 1 versus phase 2 expansion, and then I can talk about the A320 aspects.
All right. So the preliminary cut fill footprint for phase 1 versus phase 2 is actually about the same. So the graphic that we showed, I think it was board 26, shows that all the cut and fill within the park would be done under phase 1. When you extend, shift and extend the runway and then allow for the standard safety area, we've seen from the engineering that there's not much difference in going from phase 1 to phase 2. There's also, in the areas where the cut would be coming from, are obstacles that would penetrate surfaces to the runway shift that would need to be removed for those reasons as well. Sorry, I'm trying to read here what the other parts of that question were. But I think that covers the first part about phase 1 versus phase 2. And then that is also something that, like we said earlier, that we'll continue to look at as part of the ES in terms of what the slope requirements are, what the full extent of the grading area is subject to further refinement.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that response, thank you, Allison, is that the airport's proposing fully graded standard runway safety areas off of each runway end, which is a 500-foot wide by 1,000-foot graded grassy area. So if you think about a full runway safety area off of the phase 1 end and then a 1,000-foot extension on top of it, they're almost, they are in fact identically the same area in terms of the construction needed. But certainly we'll be reconsidering, via the alternatives analysis and some advancement of design in consideration of the geotechnical considerations that Allison mentioned earlier about the limits of development under both phase 1 and phase 2. And then just wanted to speak a little bit to the phase 2 considerations here. And if anyone else wants to chime in or jump in on this, more than welcome it. But essentially, it's not really an oversimplification. The capacity improvements are driven based on the operational fleet. And in the long term, the current forecast shows that the A320 becomes the critical aircraft. Again, that's regardless of whether or not phase 1 occurs. So at some point, the airport would be looking to improve the safety and operational utility of the runway to accommodate that fleet change. That fleet change is not driven by the FAA. It's not driven by the airport sponsor. It's driven purely by the operators and the operational choices that they make in terms of their service as they look nationwide, look at trends, look at markets, and decide how they want to operate their fleets. And what we're seeing in national trends is a continuing trend towards what's called upgauging. It's replacing routes that currently operate with aircraft at larger capacity. You may have seen some of the smaller regional jets that in the past operated at Yeager go away and be replaced with regional jets that have more seat capacity. It could have been from a 30-seat RJ to a 50-seat RJ, a 50-seat RJ to a 70-seat RJ, 70 to a 90. At some point, the RJs become the narrow body aircraft, which is the A320. Already there are some A320s that currently operate there on certain routes, and depending on the types of routes that may open up in the future, there may be a greater need for that. Again, all of that is based on how the aircraft companies operate their fleets. The FAA does not regulate that. We have not regulated that since 1978 when we got out of the aviation regulation in terms of how the the users operate their fleets. Is it possible that Yeager could decline to use this critical aircraft at the airplane and limit the scope of the expansion? No. As a recipient of federal funding, the airport is required in accordance with their grant assurances to maintain availability to anyone that wants to safely operate at the airport. So they would not be able to restrict access to any components of the fleet and refuse service to an A320 if the A320 was able to safely operate there. And then just to further on, what are the considerations for not moving to the A320 if it does become the critical airplane? Well, again, it's not really a choice that either the FAA or Dominique and the airport sponsor have in this. It's really a business decision on behalf of the operators. But again, we're talking conditional because this is what the current forecast shows. One of the reasons that we took this phased approach is that we recognize that there's an immediate set of actions that have a clear and defined purpose and need. And those are the actions that are encapsulated in phase one of this development. And then there are other very, very similar actions in terms of the development, in terms of the impact, that the justification is not quite there. But we do see potential for it to come in the near term, or maybe in the slightly longer far out term. What we did not want to have happen as a federal agency is bring a project to you for a 7,000 foot runway, and then recognizing that this need may be out there, and work with all of the various agencies. We have over a dozen agencies involved. We have multiple folks that are interested in the local communities about this project. Potentially go through a process where we approve that, and then have that fleet conversion happen on a accelerated basis, and all of a sudden the need is there for an 8,000 foot. We're trying to disclose the full potential of of what's being proposed here, again, phase two, it's what we're calling what's called a programmatic level of analysis. It's a much more conceptual level of analysis that will require additional work prior to approval should the need materialize. So again, I went through a lot. There was a lot in that question, but if anyone had anything that they wanted to add to that, please feel free.
Andrew, I was just going to elaborate on that question regarding our critical aircraft changing to an A320 or other narrow body. I think there's some misconception about air service generally. The airport operator, the Central West Virginia Regional Airport Authority, or CRW, does not dictate what flies in, who flies it in, or when it flies in and where it goes. Our job as an airport operator is just to be ready and available and operating a safe facility. So the forecasting that we've done along with the FAA showing that trend is really going off of what we're seeing in the aviation business, and what operators like American, Delta, United, Spirit, Southwest, and other airlines are doing. And what we're seeing with some of our regional aircraft changing to larger aircraft is that business trend. So already seeing it here at CRW, where our 30 and 50 seaters are being retired, and we're seeing 70 and 90 seaters. And actually, I keep glancing out my window here because we actually do have an A320 here right now. So we're already seeing that aircraft starting to operate here at CRW more frequently.
Well, thank you both. And a question here, and we're going to pull up another exhibit to look at while we talk about this. It appears to this viewer the runway will extend deeply into the park in phase two. Is that correct? If so, when will phase two begin and end?
Yes, so here we've pulled up the exhibit that shows both phases for the airfield and safety portion of the project. So the top exhibit shows phase one. The maroon color there is new pavement under phase one. So you'll see the extension into the park. I believe it's almost 300 foot extension and 1,100 foot shift towards Coonskin Park. You'll also see the pavement to be removed, which is in the red crosshatch area. So that's phase one. Under phase two, the new pavement is shown in blue, and the phase one pavement is shown in gray. So I believe it's another approximately 300 foot shift towards Coonskin Park on the runway 23 end. That would allow for an approach lighting system to be installed on the runway 5 end. So that would be the reasoning for the further shift. And then it would be another 1,000 foot extension. So these exhibits are at the same scale and extents so that you can see the difference between phase one and phase two in terms of how far it goes into the park. You'll also see there's a blue solid line that extends farther beyond the runway. That is the runway safety area, which is that 1,000-foot beyond the runway 2-3 end and 500 feet wide.
And Allison, I'm going to paraphrase this follow-up question. What happens to the area where the pavement goes away? Will that be used in the future for something else?
No, the pavement would be removed. And as Dominique mentioned earlier, it would just be converted to grass areas. Again, this is the proposed project from the airport. We will be analyzing different alternatives, including a shift in the other direction, as well as different runway lengths.
Dominique?
I would just add that creating those grass areas are more in line with the standard safety areas as desired by the FAA standards. So while it seems like it's an unused area of the airport, it actually provides overrun or undershoot areas for aircraft, similar to the EMAS that we have in that area, but again, much easier to maintain and less expensive.
Dominique, just for me, can you spell out EMAS?
Sure. So it's EMAS. And like Andrew mentioned earlier, it stands for Engineered Materials Arresting System. And again, it can stop aircraft in our fleet mix going up to 70 knots.
Great, thank you. So earlier there was discussion about the importance of Coonskin Park. How will alternatives be identified and reviewed? So a quick review of that process. Allison or Andrew?
Sure. So Andrew had mentioned DOT Section 4F and Section 6F of the Land and Water Conservation Fund Act. Under those, we will be analyzing alternatives of the proposed project that may have a lesser impact to those types of resources. They will be documented in full evaluations that will be coordinated with the Department of Interior and the National Park Service. Andrew, did you have more to add on the analysis of those?
Sure, I can talk about that, and I'll ask Dave if you don't mind chiming in as we discuss alternative screening here a little bit. But essentially, the suite of alternatives that are identified will initially be screened for viability in comparison to the purpose and need, and then other additional factors, and that'll create the set of alternatives that'll be considered for full impact analysis. And then once we get into that full impact analysis, we'll get into a more refined consideration of alternatives, as Allison was talking about, in the 4F context, as well as many other resource categories. Dave, I didn't know if you wanted to elaborate on that.
No, I think we're still working on what that screening process looks like and what the various criteria are going to be for the screening process. So I don't have a lot to report on yet because we have not done that analysis, but that is going to be very integral to the overall EIS process.
And if a related question, Andrew, you talked about screening criteria based on the purpose and need. So maybe explaining how there's a decision matrix of you have the different purpose and need elements on one side of the table, and then you test the alternatives against those elements. Can you just describe that a little bit more for us lay people?
Sure, I'll start, and Dave, if you want to add in as I go, please, by all means. But I mean, we will set a series of tests based on the criteria established in the purpose and need. For example, does the project improve safety at Yeager? And it could be a yes/no type question. There will be other questions that we may contemplate in terms of what the criteria for justification for the project, and an examination of those types of factors will determine whether or not justification exists for the alternative being proposed. We'll probably examine a family of alternatives at once against some criteria, and then as the families either pass or fail, Those criteria will then develop some more refined concept alternatives within each family and apply some screening criteria to them as well. Dave, I don't know if you want to get.
Yeah, Andrew's, what you said was absolutely 100% correct. And the only thing I would say is that kind of that next level of screening really is going to take a look at the reasonableness of the construction that needs to occur for those alternatives and how feasible that really is. And again, we haven't gotten into all the details yet, so I can't really comment on how they're going to get screened out. But those are definitely important questions for us to answer as we go through the alternatives process.
Thank you.
And
Let's talk-
one
yeah.
thing we want to say is, again, the reason that we haven't fully completed the purpose and need or the alternatives analysis is because this process that we're engaging in with the community scoping is intended to inform that analysis as well. As we've indicated, we've only just started, but certainly it's going to be modified to incorporate, the comments we get relative to the scope of the analysis for the EIS.
Great. Will the proposed expansion of the runway enhance the economy in the area? And if so, how?
Again, this is going to be one of the many resource categories that we'll analyze in the EIS context. There's a whole category called socioeconomics, environmental justice, and children's health and welfare. And on that, we will look at the economic ramifications of the project, both through a net benefit and a net deficit of the project. Having started in the field doing economic and econometric analyses way back many years ago, I would have to imagine that an investment of capital imagined associated with this project would have net benefit to some aspects of the local economy, especially in terms of construction, and then the carry on and multiplier effects of those investments. But one of the other things we would look at is, if there were, for example, business takings or, the current tenants of the terminal complex and their business dealings and how they may be affected during construction or potential relocation, during construction and demolition activities within the terminal. All of that stuff will be contemplated via, the EIS. It's a little too early to say where the specifics of that will be, but it certainly will be considered.
And I would just add to that the proposed project from the airport, of course, has economic development in mind, not only for the Charleston area, but the entire state. The safety area expansions and all of the terminal improvements would absolutely increase our ability to do business here at CRW. And we do hope that a project of this scale would have a very positive economic impact on the state and our region. We did have West Virginia University do a estimate of the economic impact of a project of this scale, and they had numbers in the 392 million area of economic impact just during construction. So again, with everything we do at CRW, we aim to improve and help the economic development in the state.
Thank you. Andrew, I think you just touched on this question, and I'm going to repeat it here. How could the demolition of the Keystone side how could the demolition of the Keystone side affect residents there? And Allison, this may be for you too, but Andrew just started to say, I think, that we don't know the answer just yet, but.
Well, so what I do want to say is just to clarify, when we're in the airport authority's proposed project, the demolition that they're discussing on the Keystone side is all on the surface of the airfield. It's not actually any taking down of any fill on that side. It's not taking down of the current wall on that side. It's all well above the local residents, above the church, above the creek. At airfield level, it would be removing the EMAS, removing the pavement, and then re-establishing a grassy graded area, again, at airfield grade, several hundred feet above the folks that live below. I do not imagine that construction in that area would have much in the way of effect to the residences right in the vicinity there, other than potentially, noise during, asphalt removal, which would be temporary in nature, potentially some temporary emissions associated with construction equipment. But in terms of permanent impact, I don't believe there would be much. And in fact, relocating the threshold further to the northeast would shift the noise contour slightly away from folks on that side under the proposed action. Again, that's my rough initial blush at the analysis associated with this. There's more resource categories that we would look at, and all of this would be more thoroughly vetted and detailed in the EIS document.
Great. Allison, if the EMAS is removed, what would be put in its place?
So I think Andrew just answered this, in that if the EMAS was removed, it would be replaced with grass. Just grassy areas, again, as Dominique said, to allow for that standard safety area in case an aircraft were to overrun or undershoot the runway.
Thank you. And Dave Foll, instead of cutting, filling in coonskin and taking 200 plus acres of park and recreation land in an area that desperately needs this park, can the airport explore building in areas that have already been destroyed, is the word here, by mining or other means?
Yeah, Marie, I think where that really gets to is kind of the whole concept we talked about a little bit earlier with respect to a new airport and a new location for the airport. That is something that we are taking a look at. I don't know the answer to that yet because we haven't fully vetted out these other locations. But areas that have been affected by strip mining and that sort of thing are definitely things that we're looking at in terms of an alternative for a new airport.
Thank you. And I want to reiterate that is that comment that was stated in the form of a question. Well done. But that comment could really be expressed officially and submitted through the website or the email address or the mailing address. So we really do encourage you to do that. We appreciate your insights there and your comments. So how much is the project expected to cost, and how long is it expected to take? And could we put that information on the website, or is it already there? Please advise.
So the information for cost is currently on the federal permitting dashboard at permits.performance.gov. It's a website that tracks all federal infrastructure projects and the permitting and environmental analytical timeframes associated with them. Right now, the project cost for this project is listed at $464 million for phase one, and an additional $49 million for phase two. I think certainly those numbers could be refined as we go through some of the alternative screening and preliminary design, but that's where we stand in terms of the initial cost. Construction timeframes, I don't have off the top of my head, Allison. I don't know if you have that information or Dominique.
I'm not sure that we have that information yet. We will be establishing a schedule as part of the EIS. Dominique, I'm not sure if you had initial estimates as part of the airport's planning on the project.
We did not have anything prepared at that point. And Allison, Andrew, it might be helpful for those on the call to know exactly how long just the environmental portion will take before even construction or further design could be done.
Sure. So that's a good point, Dominique. So we're just starting this process. September 30th, we issued the notice of intent to initiate this process. And the Council on Environmental Quality Regulations established a 2-year target for completion of the process. So right now we're looking to adhere to that target. We're looking for late summer of 2024 to issue what's called the Record of Decision, which is the last action associated with the environmental review, and provides the FAA's formal decision on this project. Following that, if the Record of Decision, or ROD for short, authorizes a project to proceed, it could be the the sponsor's proposed project. It could be some variant of the sponsor's proposed project. Then the sponsor would be authorized to begin seeking funding and working on design and expending federal funds towards this project. One of the things that we will be doing as part of the analysis, certainly as a construction analysis, we'll be looking at all the air quality emissions. And as we do the air quality emissions, we'll have to build, as Allison indicated, a kind of assumption on construction time frames and construction duration that will then inform that air quality analysis. So again, all of this will be contained within the EIS, but to Dominique's point, it's at least 2 years out before any of the construction or design, for that matter, would advance.
And Andrew, just to clarify, that number you cited would include runway and terminal project.
Yes. All the components of phase 1 currently listed.
So there's a concern about what's going to happen to residents on Barlow Drive when larger planes are even louder, not to mention the risk of them crashing into the houses directly below their flight path. So the question is, what is going to happen to those residents?
So again, the goal of this project is to increase the safety of the airfield and reduce the risk of things like operational deviations or excursions from the runway environment. Barlow Drive, I believe, is on the northeast side of the airfield. Is that correct? No, south side.
No, it's Barlow, Andrew, is adjacent, parallel to the river and off of Keystone.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So, again, the goal is to improve the safety. If in that area, I don't really know that we have full answers for any of the specific impacts associated with the given alternatives. And I think certainly that's something that we'll be looking at as we go through the analysis. I don't know if anyone has anything to add to that, or. I appreciate your patience as I still learn the geography around the airport. So thank you for that.
I also realize that I'm pointing out the window of my office, which no one has any context, but I'm sitting in my office. But yes, again, just to echo what Andrew said, we're always looking to improve the safety of the airport with this proposed project.
So we're just watching for additional questions to come in. While we are reviewing your questions, I'm going to repeat it again, so bear with me, that you can email all of your comments to either this email address, comments@yeagerairporteis.com. You can go to the project website and post a comment at www.yeagerairporteis.com. Or you can mail Mr. Andrew Brooks at the FAA Eastern Regional Office at 1 Aviation Plaza, Jamaica, New York, 11434. Okay, we have another question. Why expand and improve Yeager Airport versus building a new airport elsewhere? And what is the cost differential?
So certainly I'll answer it to the extent that I can. Right now, Central West Virginia Regional Airport Authority is the owner and operator of, I'm going to mix it up now. It's Yeager International or International Yeager.
West Virginia International Yeager Airport.
Thank you, Dominique. It has proposed the project. So that's the action that's in front of the agency. And that's what we're considering. And the question that this individual is asking is certainly something that will be considered as we go through the alternatives analysis. Why would you expand, and accommodate the safety issues at Yeager versus potentially building something elsewhere? As for the cost differential, the last estimate that I have for what a new regional airport would cost is dated to early 2000, maybe even like early 1990s, and that was comparable cost at that time, roughly 30 years ago. I have no updated estimate beyond that. But it's certainly something that will need to be examined, as we contemplate the alternatives analysis as we go through this process. Again, we're very early on in that process.
And
Yeah.
Andrew, if I can just add to that, not only is there the consideration of runway and terminal facility of a new airport, but also the surrounding infrastructure that we already have placed here at CRW, parking garages, supportive roadways, general aviation area with existing hangars, flight school, replacing all of those facilities at once in a new place would, of course, add to any estimated cost of just a new airport, runway, and terminal.
Thank you. Allison, will cultural wetland studies be conducted in the proposed Coonskin Park as part of the environmental studies?
Yes, they will. So I mentioned earlier that we had conducted our geotechnical borings within the park. Prior to us being able to do that field work, we actually did do initial cultural surveys for the areas that the borings would be located. We'd also done a preliminary jurisdictional determination, so a delineation of all waters within the park. As part of the EIS process, we will be conducting cultural resource studies for the entire project area. So we'll define the area of potential effects. So for both archaeological resources as well as architectural resources, we will coordinate that area with the State Historic Preservation Office. And then once we have their confirmation of that area, then we'll begin to do those surveys. I believe that those are planned to start in the new year for the cultural resources. And then for the wetland areas, those have already been delineated. But, as part of the EIS process, we will determine if there are any impacts to those resources.
Thank you. An attendee wants to know how many people attended this meeting tonight or are attending now. Right now, we have 21 attendees, but I think at one time we got up to 31 unofficially. And that's in addition to our panelists here tonight. I'm standing by while any additional questions come in. I'll just comment that we will be here until 8 o'clock. So if you have additional questions, log in to the Zoom and you can ask them.
So Maria, I do see in the Q&A session that we got questions about publishing the results of the studies that Allison was just talking about. And I do want to say that those studies, and we will have documentation updated on the website throughout the process as they become available. We did do some preliminary studies in the park prior to the geotechnical work that was done earlier this year. And we've been coordinating the wetlands with the Army Corps as well. Allison, I didn't know if you wanted to add in that regard.
Yes, Andrew. So those will be posted on the website. I believe the cultural resources report is already up, but we will double check that and make sure that what's been completed is up. And then, as Andrew mentioned, we'll continue to update the website throughout the project.
Okay, another question. When will the BRAC review be conducted of the National Guard installments at and around Yeager International Airport?
So we're not aware of any current review of the Guard base at this time. We did just get the C-130J models, which is a new installment of aircraft here at the 130th Airlift Wing. We're excited to be selected as a base for those new aircraft. So that's typically indicative of no intended BRAC review in getting a new set of equipment. Further, I'd just like to add that we have the benefit of having Major General Alan Tackett on our board here at CRW. He has been on the board for quite a while, and we work very closely with the 130th Airlift Wing and the West Virginia National Guard in coming with this proposed project to the FAA as well. They have been aware and involved in the process.
And I'm not aware of any national plans from DoD to do another base realignment and closure process. They haven't heard anything in several years about any effort in that regard since the last one was completed.
And DoD would be Department of Defense.
Yes.
Andrew, how do airlines decide whether or not to add or delete flights to and from an airport?
I mean, there's many factors that they contemplate. They look at national trends, market reviews, they review existing operations for cost per passengers and revenue that they're generating amongst all of them. But then additionally, and Dominique could probably speak to this a little bit, they work with the airports themselves and discuss potential growth in fleets and various other things. From a federal perspective, we have limited incentivized measures that we use for smaller areas that don't get as much traffic necessarily, but I don't know to what extent Yeager is engaged in any of those programs at this point. Dominique, I don't know if you want to speak more on this.
Absolutely. So we actually meet as the airport with our airline partners very frequently. We keep them updated on any economic development happening in our region and the state. They are very inquisitive as to business needs for travel in and out of the area. So we update them on any business updates and any data we receive from our business partners, as well as our leisure travelers. We collect a lot of data here at the airport, and we also work very closely with the Secretary of Tourism to find out what the travel needs and travel trends are, for example, to our new national park here in West Virginia. So they're really collecting that data from us and also monitoring the forward bookings. So who's buying a ticket from our airport and where they're going, as well as who's coming to our airport. So they study and watch those trends very closely. when we're talking to airline partners that are looking to enter the market, they do ask us about our facility and our capacity, what our current terminal can support as far as baggage and waiting areas and concessions. So we do keep them updated on what we can currently handle and what we hope to be able to handle in the future. And they do also ask about our runway and other services that we have available at the airport, including our airport response as far as firefighting goes. They want to know the safety index. And because of our partnership with the 130th, we actually have quite a bit of prepared response, higher than we would actually need to have as just a commercial airport because of our partnership with the military. I think that covers that question.
Yeah, and I'm going to pose this to the group. What would happen if nothing is done to the airport?
So Marie, that's actually one of the alternatives that we're required to analyze in accordance with the National Environmental Policy Act implementing regulations. It's considered a no action alternative, and it's considered the future baseline for comparison of impacts. So that's something that will certainly be considered, evaluated throughout the process, and will automatically screen through for consideration in the full EIS. With regard to the specifics at this time, a no action alternative would be a consideration of no change to the status quo, no development as proposed within the EIS. Other ongoing development at the airport, such as improvements to the car rental facility, improvements to a hotel, improvements to the snow removal equipment building, any other proposals down in the GA area or apron would potentially still go forward, but the no action would be none of this development. I don't know if anyone else wants to elaborate on that.
And of course, that would affect some of the air service that would plan to come into the airport.
What is the safety record of Yeager Airport as opposed to other airports in the country? And will this runway expansion enhance the safety of Yeager Airport? So, Dominique, we've been leaning on Andrew or Allison.
I could start this one. So absolutely, this project would enhance safety of the airport. That is, the main purpose of the first phase of the project. In terms of the safety record at Yeager, I know that the airport has had a number of incidents over the last 10 years. We do have those identified in our purpose and need statement that we will be making public. Dominique, I don't know if you have specifics on those incidents. I know there was a fatality that went off the runway 23 end. There were a number of other incidents, I think, going off of aircraft going off the runway as well.
Yes. So of course, standard safety areas are, of course, our goal, being a mountaintop airport here in West Virginia. The incidents that have happened over the last few years that come to mind, of course, are investigated by the NTSB, and those reports are available on their website. Not to speak to their results, some of them included pilot error, but of course, having the highest safety standard at the airport will, of course, decrease any incidents like that because there are more safety features on the field.
I just want to clarify that phase one is not exactly a runway expansion in the standard sense. It's really more of a shift to allow for the development of fully graded runway safety areas. And then again, because of the nature of the design in the airfield, there would be an additional accommodation to recoup the operational utility. Aaron, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on one point with that last question, where they're seeking to draw some comparisons between Yeager versus other airports around the country, and that's a rather difficult endeavor to try to sort out, because you would have to go through a number of data sets from both the FAA and National Transportation Safety Board. A lot of that data is kind of hard to come by, but just as a general overview of that, given the history of incidents at the airport, I would say that compared to other airports, Yeager's had more incidents than most.
So Dominique, you said you can see an Airbus 320 already parked at Yeager. So our viewer is curious, which airline is it? And does it have a capacity of 220 people?
So the current aircraft parked outside my window is actually a Sun Country charter that is in town picking up a group of charter guests, and it is a 150 seat configuration on that aircraft.
Thank you. Allison, is Yeager Airport working with the Air National Guard on this proposed project to extend the runway into Coonskin Park? And if so, how?
Yes, so as part of the EIS process, we've identified a number of federal, state, and local agencies that we've invited to be cooperating or participating agencies. So reviewing documents, providing input. We have monthly agency meetings to give them status update. We continually request feedback on documentation that we are preparing. So as part of that, the Air National Guard is one of our invited agencies. I think Andrew mentioned some others too. I mean, we're working with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Interior, the National Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as a number of state agencies and local agencies as well. The Kanawha County Commission, the City of Charleston Planning Department. I think in total, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think there's about 20 agencies that we're working with on, if not a weekly basis, a monthly basis. And those, those meetings and cooperation and coordination will continue throughout the EIS process.
Thank you.
Maria, it looks like we have one more question.
Okay, I apologize. I'm not being able to pick it up. Bear with me a second.
Sure.
Okay, I think here we go for Dave. I apologize for the delay. You said that you don't know the value of the destroyed recreational areas if this should move forward. I'm having difficulty with my screen. I apologize.
I can read it, Maria.
Thank you. I don't know why it keeps cutting off my screen.
So the question is, you state that you don't know the value to the destroyed recreational areas if this extension goes through, and acknowledge it is unknown what effect artificial intelligence and drones are going to have on air and ground transportation. So how can you propose the destruction of our unique recreational resource at this point in time? Dave, if you want to try, I can jump in as well.
Well, I think there's several kind of parts to that particular question. The first is that you're right, we don't know the value of that. That is what the EIS is intended to do, is to analyze the impacts associated with the project that the airport authority has brought forward. for us to look at. So that's going to be part of our overall process, is understanding what is the project, what are the impacts associated with that project, and be able to articulate what that is, so that is good information that decisions can be made from. So we're too early in the process to be able to know the value, but that is part of what we need to do to be able to analyze this particular project that the airport authority has brought before us.
And
And,
would it be, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'll speak a little bit to the effect of artificial intelligence and drones
Yeah,
having
okay.
ground in air and ground transportation. Right now, the passenger capacity of unmanned aerial vehicles does not match anywhere near the commercial fleet that's currently in operation. Certainly, we have entire organizations within the FAA dedicated to development of and the consideration of the future of UAV, the effect of artificial intelligence and deployment of effective UAV fleets, and that's certainly something that is constantly being looked at nationwide. However, relative to the proposed project here, there's no current proposal in place for the development of UAV type operations at Yeager. And again, as we said before, should that proposal arise outside of the EIS context, it would be considered in a separate NEPA process. But with respect to this current proposal, it's relative to the forecast that was developed based on the commercial fleet, the GA fleet, the flight school, the military operations, all the current aircraft that operate at Yeager, as well as an examination of the future. We have that analysis done currently, and the proposal is being done to meet that current forecast. So it's not that we don't have a sense of what that impact would be, it's that there's just no current proposal in place at this moment in time for this location in particular.
And I did get my screen back, so I can read it again.
But I think really, just to follow on what Dave was saying, is that there's no decisions that have been made yet. This is the start of the decision-making process. In 2 years hence, it'll be time to make those decisions, and we will have all of this information. We will have all of this analysis complete. We will have gone to you, hopefully, more than once, to have additional conversations as these analyses develop, and use all of that input in to make a recommendation to the decision makers within the not only the FAA, but all of the cooperating and participating agencies and their applicable permitting requirements.
And Andrew, this is my question, but as part of a scoping process, that's what this is where we're at. We're scoping what the questions might be, so that will help focus your analysis. Is that correct?
Exactly, yes. Again, I mentioned, we recognize that we don't have the local flair for the proposals, and so that's why we come in and, we try to solicit that local perspective, the resources that are consideration. I mean, when this proposal was first brought to us, certainly one of the key factors we honed in on, in addition to the river and Coonskin Branch, was the park resource. And I think we've heard loud and clear from many of you folks over the meetings about the concerns that you all have with regard to that resource. And we do have procedures in place to analyze the effects on the resource and factor those into the decision-making process as it goes forward. And I want to say that with respect to park resources, those are some of the most prescriptive analytical methodologies that we have when it comes to impacts of this nature. They dictate decisions that we need to make. Whereas for air quality, for example, we could, consider, a range of different impacts, or noise, we could consider a range of different impacts. For recreational resources, they prescribe that we have to pick the alternative that causes the least, the prudent and feasible alternative that causes the least overall harm to the resource. And not only that, they prescribe exactly how impacts to that resource need to be replaced. So thank you.
I'm going to ask you to build on that. If Yeager Airport, if the alternative should be that it affects Coonskin Park, would you be enhancing the park? And if so, how? You talked about it's very prescriptive, so.
Sure. So in the event that we are considering a proposal that would be going into the park and taking park resources, we would have to do an examination of the prudent and feasible alternatives that reduce harm. We would have to look at the incorporation of planning factors to plan for the least overall harm to the resource. And then if we still are at the point, again, this analysis contemplates two avenues of impact, both under what we call 4F, or just our normal recreational effects analysis, but also Land and Water Conservation Fund, or 6F, which has the prescription for replacement in kind of the recreational properties affected. So if it's allowed to expand into the park and does result in a physical use of the park, which it looks like any extension in that direction is likely to occur, there would have to be a contemplation for how that could be alleviated. Under 4F, that could be offset through additional recreational improvements in the park, but under 6F, it requires replacement in kind of any physical taking, and physical taking under 6F includes any use of a land that exceeds 6 months where it's taken out of recreational use. So even those portions of property, let's say, that would be used for fill and then restored under 4F because they could be out of recreational service for a period exceeding 6 months, would still require recreational replacement at an alternate site. So there's a lot to contemplate with this. There's a lot that needs to be discussed, and it requires the engagement of many of the agencies that have responsibility for these resources. And again, we're very preliminary in this process, but I mean, please rest assured that this is something that we have been in conversation and stress the importance of these processes, the timeliness of communication. And because of, again, as I said, coming into this process, I knew this was going to be one of the main areas of concern. We certainly hear that loud and clear.
And I would add to that, Andrew, we as the airport are very happy that this analysis and this much attention is being given to the possible impacts of our proposed project. And we would like to assure everyone that we've been working closely with the county and the parks since the very beginning of coming up with this proposed project. And our ultimate goal, of course, is to enhance Coonskin and also the recreational opportunities available in Kanawha County.
Thank you. And as we get close to wrapping up to our 8 o'clock endpoint, will these questions and answers be available to review after the call is over?
So we're going to be using this to inform the development of what's called our scoping report. The only comments and questions that'll be physically reproduced are those that we get on the record. So if anyone wants to see how their input is being adapted into the scope of analysis for the EIS, I strongly encourage you to put them in formally through any of the vehicles that we have communicated, either via the website, via an email to myself, or via mail. An email to the website, mail to myself, let me clarify that. Those will be incorporated into what will ultimately be a scoping report. Once the scoping report is done, following the conclusion of the scoping process, it will be made available on the website. I would anticipate that would be sometime in the early part of next year before that report would be fully available.
All right, very quickly, we have 2 quick questions. So do current projections think a future extension beyond phase 2 is likely? What about a future pivot or expansion? And Dave, if you'll be thinking about this, can you disclose some of the proposed new airport locations by recent public comment mentioned? Although I think that's sharing information secondhand. So let's go back to Andrew. Do current projections think a future extension beyond phase 2 is likely?
No, there's no consideration of future extension beyond phase two. I don't know. The forecast goes out to 2040 at this point, and that's 20 years hence in the future. An extension to 8,000 feet will provide certainly a operational flexibility and utility to much more potential entrants should those evolve in the forecast. But as of right now, that they're not currently in the fleet mix.
Dave?
Sure. So I think Susan said it in the beginning where she talked about the previous studies that were done. Maybe it was Andrew back in the 90s and early 2000s. We're going to take a look at those and see where those locations were, whether they're still available. And I don't know the answer to that. I haven't seen those reports. So we're busy diligently getting those reports to help us identify some of those locations. Folks had mentioned in conversations and during the public workshop some other potential locations. I've asked them to put those in writing because I need to actually know exactly where those are. So not being from Charleston myself, I can't physically describe where those particular locations are, but I have asked those folks to go ahead and put that in writing so that we have it. I wish I could give more, but I just don't know the answer to that at this point.
All right, well, thank you. Well, we're going to pull up the comment mechanisms again, and I just want to thank you all for participating tonight. Really encourage you to submit your comments and questions formally now through these mechanisms, comments at YeagerAirportEIS.com, on the website at www.YeagerAirportEIS.com, or mail to Andrew Brooks, the Environmental Program Manager, Eastern Regional Office, AEA-610, Federal Aviation Administration, 1 Aviation Plaza, Jamaica, New York 11434, and note that the comment period has been extended until 5 p.m. Eastern Time on Tuesday, November 29th, 2022. With that, I'm going to adjourn and wish you all a great evening. Thanks for participating tonight.